How would you feel about a law that requires people over the age of 70 to pass a specialized driving test in order to continue driving? Sorry if this ends up being long, but it's angered me for quite some time. About 10 years ago my mother at age 69 had a massive stroke. They didn't expect her to live, let alone come out of it mostly alright. Which she did except for some vision loss in her left eye. Not total, just peripheral. So she can only see perfectly straight out of that eye. So after about a year recovering from the stroke and the ensuing infection from the surgery that ended up being worse than the stroke itself, she decides she wants to go get tested to see if she can retain her driver's license, required by law in my province of Canada. My father was not well either as he had a long-term terminal illness, so I pack them both up in my truck and take them to the DMV. Me and my father happily assuming there is no effing way in hell she will pass. Aside from her vision issues, the amazingly quick-witted and swift woman I grew up with was very unsure of herself at all times and took forever to make the smallest decisions. It broke my heart, and it didn't even occur to me to be scared that she would get her license back. Well, she did. Passed with flying colors, the DMV guy said. As a SAR, search and rescue tech, the idea of taking him up in the helicopter and throwing him out without a rope occurred to me. 1 week later, accident number 1. T-boned a poor lady as she was coming out of the grocery store. Not much damage and no injuries thankfully. Mother still refused to admit she wasn't fit to drive. Month later, accident 2. She panics on a multi-lane cross-city road and ends up on the raised median and rips the entire exhaust system off her car. Still won't admit any issues. At this point I'm amazed I didn't have ulcers. Shortly after accident 2 my father passed away. I did everything up to and including begging to get her to give up the license. She wouldn't do it, and for the next few months I spent every day with a knot in my stomach until I spoke to her around 6 PM every night once she was home from running around. Then around 1 PM I get a call from her cell phone. This phone I bought her that she mostly ignored, except to charge it. I couldn't understand a word she said. She was so upset on the phone. I managed to get her general location out of her and hopped in a car and more than exceeded the speed limit getting down there. Upon arriving there are 2 ambulances. Shoes in front of her car and it's up on the curb. She's sitting on the curb next to it bawling her eyes out and I'm terrified she's killed someone. Turns out a man and his son were walking out of the soccer pitch next to the road. Began to cross on the crosswalk and she didn't see them. She thankfully only struck the father, and aside from being banged up he wasn't super seriously injured. Because of my job I knew most of the police officers in the city, so one of them offered to follow me back to her house so she could take me back down to get her car. By the time I had done so and got back to her condo she had stopped crying, threw me the extra set of keys to the car she had, and told me to get rid of the car. She even tried to get the DMV worker that passed her fired after that. She immediately realized she shouldn't have ever gotten it back. She was actually terrified that she had been driving like that. Years later she still comments about how she never even saw the man and his son and how she could have killed one or both of them. I have all the respect in the world for seniors. My mother was one of the first women CEOs in this province and was a hellcat in her day. I learned a lot from her, but I also learned to accept limitations. If you are older reading this post, if you think for even a second that you could maybe not be the safest person to be on the road, talk to and listen to your loved ones. It's horrible to give up that freedom. It would be more horrible for you to kill some innocent person because you are too proud to give it up. Here in Illinois my grandpa had to do it every year after 75. I think older drivers definitely need to be retested and have restrictions put on their licenses to driving at night. Driving only within certain distances of the home. Driving above certain speeds, etc. Up to and including revocation if found to be impaired to significant degree. And I'm staring down 70 myself. In Japan, they have special decals that identify new drivers and the elderly, which I think is a good thing. If you see someone with an elderly tag, you might not assume that driver sees everything you do or reacts as quickly as you do. I had trouble getting my dad to quit driving because I knew he couldn't see. He couldn't tell me from my daughter from across the room. I called the DMV for suggestions and they sent him a letter to come in for a vision test. He passed. He was in his 90s with cataracts and dementia. We had a lot of rancor over this issue and he ended up living with my brother whom he would actually listen to, and he quit driving. That's a great idea. I'm going to call my 68-year-old congressman and ask him to support such legislation. Edit. Most driving laws are passed by state legislators, who usually do drive themselves. Old retired guy here. 74 years old to be precise. I would accept such a test, provided it was only to catch really age-related diseases, dementia, poor reflexes, etc. I live in a retirement community and most of the people who should not have a license have already given them up. The first day I was here I heard a conversation between two guys. Guy 1, I just turned 88 and turned in my driver's license. Guy 2, why would you do that? Guy 1, I don't want to spend the rest of my life in jail. Ideally, we'd all be retested every 10 years or so until we hit 60. Then we are retested every 5 years. However, older folks are a huge voting bloc and it's unlikely this would ever pass. I send patients for driver's evaluations if their ability to navigate through my office is concerningly questionable. Unaware drivers are just as dangerous as impaired drivers. I work with the olds for a living. The frequency that they casually drop my doctor told me I can't drive anymore, coupled with the fact that they drove to my office is terrifying. One woman could barely walk, who also told me she couldn't see while I was demonstrating something to her, got in her car and drove away after her appointment. There's another man who constantly tells us he donated his car to someone who needed it, but regrets it because he has to take the bus everywhere. The Sun told us they literally had to take it away because he kept driving on sidewalks and running lights. And he refused to stop driving after his license was suspended for drunk driving. I watched another woman just YOLO pull away from the curb as she was leaving, nearly causing a multi-car pileup. One woman came in because she had head trauma from an accident she caused. She drove herself. Oh. Also, I've also had my bumper smashed in by a patient just trying to park in the spot next to me. I get a full dose of their cognitive skills in my office. There are many times I'm pleasantly surprised at how sharp they still are. But more often than not I'm afraid for those who are sharing the road with them on their way home. While I agree they do deserve the dignity of having the same rights as everyone else, I do not believe that right should supersede the safety of literally anyone else on the road with them. Let me say this about that. The neighbor I love is 93 and still driving. When she's up to it, she can barely see the on/off switch on her vacuum cleaner. Should she be driving, I want her to maintain independence, but at the same time, I don't think it's safe for her or others. Yet the DMV doesn't require her to take a vision exam or a competency test. Ugh, please. My grandma is practically blind and went to take her driving vision test to renew her license. She failed, but the lady at the DMV felt bad, so she had her take it again and gave her hints so she could pass it. So now my practically blind grandma is out on the road still. It's for their safety as much as anyone else's. I'm so mad that the lady at the DMV was so irresponsible as to let her keep driving. All for it. When I was 14 my friend was coming to my house and he got killed by my next door neighbor who happened to be elderly. My friend was on his skateboard and he was just up the street from my house. From the position of his body and where elderly guy stopped his car I could see he made a super sharp left turn that killed him and ran over my other friend. The other friend survived and recovered from his injuries, but my other friend not so lucky. Oh, and my granddad has Alzheimer's and frequently forgets where he is. And I think he still has his license, though my grandma finally took his keys. I'm an eye doc and I'd be all for it. You know how often I get berated or threatened by geriatrics when I strongly suggest that they quit driving because they no longer meet the legal requirements for driving. People should have to retake the driver's test every 10 years if not 20. I've seen too many terrible drivers of all ages. My grandma rear-ended a line of stopped cars on the highway at full speed, no brakes, with my 5-year-old brother in the car because she thought she saw a deer on the side of the road. She's been in another, less serious wreck and has come to a dead stop while on the highway because she forgot where she was going multiple times since then. My dad had to unplug her battery and tell her that her car doesn't work anymore, so she would start asking for rides. I would love if they took age into account in some way. I'm not an expert on anything, so I don't know how they would do it, so that families wouldn't have to be torn between treating their elders like a child or worrying if they are going to get a call from the hospital anytime they're behind the wheel. My fiance's brother was killed riding his motorcycle Sunday by a 91-year-old who pulled out in front of him. He left behind a wife and 3 children. He was one of the best guys I ever met. We are all devastated, and it could have been prevented. That man had no business behind the wheel. I ride a motorcycle and almost got hit by an elderly woman going the wrong way down a one-way street a few months ago. I was honking and waving my hands, and she was blissfully unaware of my existence. I managed to swerve off to the side with enough room to spare, but what if I had a bigger bike and wouldn't have been able to? We ended up going to the same place, and when I asked her if she knew she was going the wrong way and if she even saw me, she said, "Oh no dear, I was going the right way. You were just speeding." I was literally going less than 10 miles per hour because I was getting ready to turn. And even if I was, did she plan on just mowing me down? It's ridiculous that she was so oblivious to what actually happened and still got behind the wheel of a car and drove home. I'm so sorry for your loss. That's really terrible. I'm gonna drop my pegs for him tomorrow.